Hey, what's up guys, Trisha's Boosters here and welcome back to another Digimon video. Today I have a pretty cool one for you guys. I wanted to do this pretty much the moment they announced the new Ultimate Cup rules for the new season, but was kind of busy, but now I finally found the time to do it. Yeah, we're gonna be doing another BT11 tier list. However, this time we're not gonna be looking at it in the traditional sense, but with the new Ultimate Cup rules they just announced a few days ago, which they will be using for, well, at least the coming few Ultimate Cups, which are, in case you haven't heard them yet, you have to build monocolor pretty much, so all your cards have to include your base color. So you can play dual colored cards, but only if they do include the same color as the rest of your deck. Then they also made some hits where they banned the promo Begra Army, they banned Dev X, and they limited, what's it called, Chaos Degradation, as well as Grandis. But yeah, we'll really talk about how these rules and hits impact certain decks while we're going through the tier list. Yeah, because that just seems the most logical way to do it. And we do have a lot of decks to look at. I have 37 decks here in this format, which we're going to be discussing. And just a quick recap how I always do these tier lists. Tier 1, these are decks I expect to be winning these Ultimate Cups. Tier 1.5, don't surprise me if they do win an Ultimate Cup, but they do have to run into certain good matchups to be able to go, you know, undefeated the entire tournament. Tier 2 are decks that can definitely perform competitively, they can top, but I don't really see them winning unless they get really lucky. Then basically Tier 3 is anything below that. Like, I don't really expect these type of decks to top. Of course, it's always possible, but they definitely are not on my radar. They're more like for fun decks. And then I added a tier, this is now unplayable, where basically I put the decks that are now literally made unplayable. But yeah, again, we're going to be talking about them as we go. Again, we have a lot of decks to go through, so we're just going to hop right into it. Alphabetical order, as you can see, and the first deck we're going to be looking at is Aegis Ramon. Honestly, I think ever since I started doing these tier lists and this deck came up, I've always been putting it in tier 3, and that's exactly where I'm going to be putting it now. Yes, compared to other decks that got hit, you could see that relatively this deck became better, but I still don't think it's anywhere near tier 2 where I would be like, oh yeah, Aegis Ramon is gonna make top 16 at one of these events or top 8. I do think it's not like a horrible deck. I definitely think as far as like pet or fun decks go, it is pretty good, but it's definitely not the most competitive type of deck. And I always say it's basically like blue Bloomlord, and Bloomlord is basically not hit in this list at all, so if you want to be playing that type of deck, you might as well be playing Bloomlord, right? So yeah, I'm going to be putting this in tier 3. And the next one is an interesting one. We have Alphamon. I do think this deck is good in the current BT11 format, like without the Ultimate Cup rules. However, this is, of course, in essence, it is a black deck. And you would maybe think, oh, so it didn't really get hit, right? None of the cards you would usually play in this deck, except for Dev X, I guess, they got actually hit on the ban list. However, because Cool Boy is a white card, you actually can't be playing it in your black Alphamon deck now. And you're going to be seeing that in a lot of the X antibody decks. I'm going to be mentioning this because it is definitely a very hard hit. You also can't be playing the X antibody option, which in this deck, I don't really think it matters that much. Like, mostly you would be playing one anyway. If you're even playing it, you can definitely make a top tier list for this deck at least, without the option in it at all. But yeah, the Cool Boy hit is obviously very rough. This deck wasn't really doing so hot in the BT11 format anyway, just because a lot of decks are just inherently a little bit stronger than this deck is. And mostly because of the Cool Boy hit, I can't be putting this as a tier 3 deck. I do think it's a little bit better than Aegis Ramon though. But yeah, usually what you want to be doing with this deck, like set up a huge turn with like all your tamers in the back and then move out your stack and just, like, even with one memory, you sometimes could go up to a level 7 and clear the board and do a lot of damage. But yeah, without Cool Boy, that's gonna be very, very hard. And you know, Greymon is still at 1, so that also definitely limits your options. So yeah, sadly, Alphamon gonna be a tier 3 deck. Next one, I have Ancient Greymon here, which I'm actually using to represent red hybrid. And honestly, I think this might be a little bit of an underdog in this upcoming Ultimate Cup format. You know, Black or Greymon was kind of hit in a sense, again with the Cool Boy. And also with the monocolor rules, which I will be talking about a little bit later. Red Hybrid hasn't really been doing that much, but, you know, we will probably be seeing a lot less Black or Greymon and also, you know, Hades Force in decks, which makes Red Hybrid a little bit better. And it wasn't really hit at all. Like, you can literally play all the cards you want to in this deck, pretty much, because you are usually in this deck only playing red cards anyway. Yeah, I think this deck might honestly be kind of good. It definitely wouldn't surprise me if this actually, like, wins Ultimate Cup, but I do think it will be represented, yeah, not by a lot of people, pretty much. The deck is very good, but I do think it's a little bit under the radar. Again, it wouldn't surprise me if it does really well, but I'm a little bit hesitant to actually put it in tier 1. Just because it hasn't been doing anything at all the past couple of formats. It will though in the next format, but we're not there yet. So, yeah, I'm just going to be putting it in tier 2 for now. I definitely think this will grab like a top spot for 1 or 2 maybe. But the next one is going to be Begra Army. Yeah, I don't want to talk about this too much. I'm just going to be putting it in tier 3. It's a little bit like the Aegis Ramon deck where, you know, compared to other decks, relatively it's got a boost because it didn't really get hit in any particular way, but all in all, the deck is just a little bit underwhelming. Yeah, I'm just going to be putting it in tier 3 for that reason. The next one is Beelzemon, which I also think is pretty interesting, or like Musketeer, right? But lists nowadays are just playing, you know, purple stuff and then Beelzemon and not really much into the Gunramon or stuff like that. This deck definitely was hit with the monocolor rules, because one of the things you always want to do with this deck is play, you know, the multiple color options, the heavy bullet showering, the blue options like Kokaida's Breath. Also got really popular in lists for Beelstar, and Primitive Kaga also topped with this deck, so. And he was also definitely playing multiple color cards, right? However, I actually don't think this card is terrible. I definitely think it's better than all the tier 3 decks I have in the tier 3 spot right now. Yes, you're gonna have to play stuff like Trump Swords and cards like that, but Primitive Kaga said it in his deck profile, like, the deck is basically just a nail-bone spam deck with some defensive options, and if you're really looking at the deck from that perspective, the core of the deck wasn't hit at all. Honestly, you just have to play other defensive options, which are, admittedly, they're not as good, but you still have the tools to play them. And yeah, I definitely don't think the deck is, it's actually terrible. Like, I could definitely see myself bringing this deck to one of the Ultimate Cup tournaments, and not feeling like I have no chance to top at all. So yeah, for now I'm just gonna be putting it in tier 2, but maybe I'm wrong, and, you know, losing all the multiple color options really is very rough for this deck, which I definitely think it is, but it's even rougher than I think, and it will be more like a tier 3 deck, but for now I'm gonna be putting it in tier 2, and just, like, fingers crossed that it tops and I'm right, and then, you know, feel good about myself. Yeah. The next deck we're gonna be talking about is Black or Greymon. So, this is definitely a tier 1 deck. In the regular BT11 format, there's no doubt about that. However, it did get hit pretty hard by this ban list. Again, Cool Boy was hit, which I definitely think is one of the main cards in this deck. And also with the new Greymon X, losing the X antibody option is really rough, because it means that, yes, you can play the Greymon X to do the DP reduction, or not the DP reduction, but the cost reduction. However, you won't be able to use the protection effect, and playing Black or Greymon without the protection is actually pretty rough. I do think that's, which is also something that makes Beelstar a pretty good deck. I do think that in this format, security bombs and options that get rid of stacks are very powerful. So Black or Greymon will definitely suffer from that. However, you can, of course, just play the BT9 Greymon X, which I definitely think is very good. However, it does again make the deck a little bit slower. Also, the X antibody option was really good to go like for swing, then evolve into your Black or Greymon X antibody and do some shenanigans with that, which you also lose. However, you do still have tools like Alters mode to give your stack with the, what's it called, the Greymon X antibody, the BT11 one, a little bit of protection. Yes, it is not as consistent, but it's still a possibility, and I do still think that this is definitely a tier 1 deck in the in the Ultimate Cup format, but probably like bottom tier 1 to be honest, but I do still think that it's definitely a deck that we're gonna be seeing winning these tournaments. Even with the loss of Cool Boy and the X antibody option, you can still build this deck a little bit different than in the regular format, and you'll still be fine. However, I don't think we'll be going back to a little bit more classical approach to the deck building of this deck, because we did see promo Blackmon Greymon making a huge splash at the finals, and for good reason. That card's absolutely insane in the current format, but it's basically unplayable unless you want to go entirely black base. And then again, you're just losing out to protection effects entirely, because you can't even play stuff like Ultras Mode or the BT9 Greymon X. So I don't really think we'll be seeing a lot of that. Yeah, Blackmon Greymon still a very good deck. Don't really think will be top of tier 1, but definitely very, very solid option. And then a deck that might very well be one of the best decks in the form is actually Ragnar Lord Mon. We didn't see this perform so well at finals. I think it made top 16 at just one of the finals in the BT11 format. Deck profile up on my channel actually. But I did already say before finals, I did think this deck was very, very good. I just think it was pretty much underrepresented. It is has a pretty high skill ceiling, which I think is very good. It's very fun. It does have a lot of tools. It can go really aggro with the Ragnar Lord Mon. It can play control with the Hydramon. And it didn't get hit at all. In fact, it even got boosted a little bit. Not just relatively because other decks got hit, but also because Def X is actually just removed out of the format entirely, which was pretty much one of the hard counters against this deck. So yeah, I definitely think Ragnar Lord Mon, is one of the best decks to play in the upcoming Ultimate Cup format. And I definitely think we will be seeing this deck perform very, very well. Alright, moving on to what is famously my favorite deck in the entire Digimon TCG. We'll be talking about Security Control. And I am very sad to admit that this is probably a tier 1 deck. So at first when I saw the list, I was like, oh yeah, Security Control is just dead, it's unplayable. Because, you know, you can't play Mimi, you can't play Kari. So you're basically shutting down their use of well, not only Chaos Degradation, which is at 1 anyway, but most specifically Flame Hell Scythe, which is one of the best cards in the deck, of course. But then I realized in BT11 there's actually a dual color yellow-purple tamer in the form of Mirage. So, you know, you can pretty much just play the deck exactly as you want to, except for Def X, which is a little bit sad. And again, Blackmon Greymon was kind of hit, which is sort of a counter to the deck, which means that you'll be playing more good matchups again where you're playing in the tournament, and you can just go hard on all the yellow options like Wyvern's Breath and whatever the other one is called. I'm going to be putting it up on the screen here, and then, you know, it has a hard name, but it is a very strong security option. And, you know, the Blackmon Greymon deck, it can't even really play Yuya if you're playing red base, so yeah, I guess it is a good time to be a Security Control player. Which is very, very sad in my opinion, but it is what it is. This deck is definitely very strong in this format. And yeah, talking about it makes me depressed, so we're just moving on to a deck I actually like very much. In fact, it's one of my favorite decks, and I also think it's very good in this format, which is gonna be Brigade. Which, admittedly, I do not think is a tier 1 deck. However, you know, again, relatively to other decks which got hit, Brigade didn't get hit at all. I guess Def X, which is a card you do play in the deck, got hit. But at the same time, that's a boost for the deck, because that means you can now just go as wide as possible and you're not really getting punished for it. But yeah, compared to the power levels of the other tier 1 decks, I definitely think this is a little bit lower. It is very consistent though, because you're playing a lot of rookies, of course. You're basically playing a rookie rush deck. You can play a lot of security options, which I do think are very good in this format. But it's always just a little bit luck dependent, because, you know, you have to get lucky to have them in security. But I'm gonna be putting this at tier 1.5. It definitely wouldn't surprise me if this deck does very well in the upcoming Ultimate Cup format, because I do think it's very good. But, you know, just compared to the power level of the tier 1 decks, I do just think it's a little bit lower. And there's definitely some bad matchups in this format for the deck. Like, for example, Blue Flare. That deck is very strong in this Ultimate Cup format, I think, and is a horrible matchup for Brigade. Like, it's almost unwinnable, to be honest. I tested this a lot, and it really made me very, very sad. But yeah, I do still think this deck's very good, and if you don't run into too much blue flare, then I definitely think you can perform very well with this deck. Then moving on to the next one, we're gonna be having Darknightmon, which I do think is, again, it is actually quite good in this format. Not like Lord Mon or Security Controllers per se, but I definitely think it's a lot better in the Ultimate Cup format than it is in the regular BT11 format. Again, relative to other decks, it got a little bit of a boost, right? And you are only playing black cards in the deck anyway, so the deck itself barely got hit. Again, aside from Death X, which again is a hard counter to this deck as well, so you're kind of having a good time not having to play around that. Regardless, I'm gonna have to put this in tier 2, because I do think it is not quite as good as the Brigade is in this format. Or any of the tier 1 decks, of course. But, yeah, also, actually, the fact that Mulligan exists in this format is very nice for the deck as well. But even with Mulligan existing and the other things I talked about, I do not think this is necessarily a deck that I would be expecting to win any of the Ultimate Cups. But I do think it's definitely a very fair choice. Then moving on to a deck that a lot of people were like, man, you forgot to talk about this deck. Which is actually Blackmon, which I forgot to talk about in the BT11 video. And I do think that Blackmon's actually a pretty good pick for this format. I'm going to be putting it in tier 1.5 because it's just kind of a high roll deck. It's also a deck where Mulligan really helps and didn't really get hit, except for, I can't remember the name of the card right now, but there is this blue card that they play in the Blackmon deck that's actually quite important for the deck. I'm going to be bringing it up, of course, on the screen, but I guess they kind of got hit because, you know, you can't play a blue card in a red deck. But other than that, I think the deck's pretty much unhit, and it can definitely high roll. I think it topped in the North American finals, and it bubbled out on European finals, actually. Because the guy got a game loss, actually, or a match loss even. So, yeah, pretty unlucky. It might even have topped at Euros. But yeah, I definitely think this is a good pick, but it is a little bit high rolly, which is why I can't really afford to put it in tier 1, in my opinion. And again, it can definitely be very weak to security options if you do not see the delicate plan. But yeah, definitely I think a pretty cool pick. Then the next deck is going to be the Sukamon deck, which is one of those decks that got just better by comparison because nothing in it was really hit. However, with that being said, I still think it is not the best deck, sadly. It is very cool and definitely does have some good matchups across the board, but just inherently, it's not as strong as the other decks that I'm putting at tier 1 or tier 1.5 right now. But I definitely think playing this deck, you will be having a better time in the Ultimate Cup format than you will be having in the regular BT11 format. And who knows, it might definitely make top cut because the format is very unexplored, so maybe it's actually a good pick. But for now, I'm putting it in tier 2. And now we finally have our first contender for the This Is Now Unplayable category, which is Examon. Honestly, I think this deck is really good in the BT11 format. It's like a tier 1.5 deck. I played it myself at the 3v3 side event at the European finals, and it was really good for me. Like, if you play against good matchups, it feels almost unbeatable. However, you literally just can't play it in this format. You can play Slayer Ramon control, I guess, but Slayer Ramon control without the blocker inheritable is kind of bad, and you can't be playing the blocker inheritable because you can't be playing the green cards in the deck. And without Slayer Ramon, the entire Examon deck, it really doesn't function. So you have to pick one of the lines, and both of the lines individually, they suck. So this deck is sadly very, very much unplayable. Which is sad because I really like it, but yeah. Like a lot of Jogras decks or DNA Evolution decks, which we'll be seeing later on in the list. Yeah, you can't be playing this, basically. Then the next deck is Galacticmon, which actually topped European finals, which is very cool. I'm not quite sure how it did it, but it did. So it actually might be a little bit better than I gave it credit for before. So just for that sole reason, I'm going to be putting it in tier 2, because again, this is one of those decks just unhit. You only play black cards. None of the cards you play in the deck are on the ban list. And apparently it did fairly well. I also think it has a good security control matchup, which is nice, because the Galacticmon basically, it prevents itself from leaving the field by any means. However, of course, stuff like Wyvern's Breath is still kind of rough. Because I do think Galacticmon is 15k, so... Yeah, unlucky if you do get hit by that Wyvern's Breath, I guess. But... yeah, I guess it is tier 2. I'm not too familiar with the deck, but just, you know, on the merits that it made day 2 at European Finals, I'm gonna make it tier 2 and just leave it at that. Then Galacticmon is interesting, because now with all the X antibody decks being hit, this deck got better, and I do feel kind of like it wasn't bad to begin with, it was just outclassed by the X antibody decks. So now this deck might finally have a chance to shine, and I'm just gonna go put it on tier 1.5 here. I'm really not sure if it belongs there or tier 2. It definitely is not a tier 3 deck though. I do think it is definitely better than that. But it's either like upper tier 2 or like bottom tier 1.5. And I really do hope we get to see this deck shine, because ever since its release and all the support it's gotten, it never really got, you know, to really be a tier 1 deck, except for maybe in like literally BT1, right? But yeah, just because it got relatively better, I think it is like a tier 1.5 deck. Moving on to Grandis, which is interesting to talk about, because this is one of the decks that actually got hit, because Grand Kuwaga went to 1. I hate to admit it, but this is probably a tier 1 deck in the regular BT11 format, but now with Grand Kuwaga being hit, it's kind of sacky, right? Because if you do see the Grand Kuwaga, then, I mean, good for you, you're just playing like a tier 1 deck in the regular format, which means per definition it is a tier 1 deck in this format as well. However, you do have to see it, and it is just at 1 if it's in security. You have to play Control Grandis, I guess, which doesn't even get like all of the good effects, because you can't play the X antibody option either. So it makes it kind of hard for me to really classify this. I'm gonna be putting it in tier 2, because you can definitely just, you know, get lucky most of your games and draw the Grand, and then the deck is very, very good. But if you don't draw the Grand, then the deck is just like a weird control deck, which is outclassed by a lot of other control decks. Honestly, I feel like if you want to be playing green, you might as well play Bloom Lord in this format. But I definitely don't think the deck's unplayable. So yeah, let's say it is like a Beelstar tier deck. And it does still lose to security options, right? So yeah, I'm just gonna put it there, and maybe I get surprised and it wins one of these. Like, who knows? Then another very nice DNA Dissolution deck, and yeah, let's just put both the Imperial decks right there. Basically, they're both unplayable, right? Like, the red-purple one is definitely unplayable, and then the green-blue one, like, I guess you can try to spice it up and go play some dual color, like blue-green level 4s, and then hard play those, and then go, like, DNA to the Imperial, and then maybe it is fine for playing blue base, but, you know, without the Stingmon, and you can't even play the... Is it Parasaur? This other green 3-cost hard play guy that they play sometimes in Imperial list. Yeah, the DNA Dissolution decks just have a bad time in this format. It is what it is. Don't really want to waste too much time talking about it. And after these two, we actually find Examon, which is also literally unplayable, because one of the things that Examon does is Sistermon shenanigans, and guess what? Sistermon are actually white cards, and Examon is red, so what do you really want to be doing with this deck? Yeah, this deck basically just got the X at this in this format. Like, it's literally not playable. You can't really do anything with it that you want to do, so unlucky. Then I have Jet Sylphimon here, which I'm using to represent yellow hybrids, which I do think is an interesting pick for this format. It's a little bit like security control, but then I guess it has a little bit more engine to actually try to do stuff itself. It has the Venusmon, which is a nice tool. I still think it's like probably a tier 2 deck, just like red hybrid. Like, it's just kind of hard to judge how good it will be, because yes, Black Wargreymon will be less relevant, but I definitely think it will still be played, and it definitely has a bad time against that deck. It's just hard to judge because this deck hasn't really been played in the past format at all, so comparing it to other decks is kind of rough. Then we have Justimon here, which is a mono black deck, but I personally really like to run this with like a little bit of a red tamer engine, so you can play some red options, so it is kind of hit in that way. But I've been testing it a little bit with the XL armor, and I definitely don't think it's bad. But honestly, putting it above tier 3 is probably not doing it justice, pun intended. I wish it was better, but it just ain't. It's just so hard to get all the pieces together. Even though we do have the mulligan rule, which makes it a little bit less terrible, but yeah, it's just simply outclassed by a lot of other decks. Then blue hybrid, I'm just gonna put it with the other hybrid decks, to be honest. Just basically everything that applies to the other hybrid decks also applies to this hybrid deck. Yep. And now finally we have another top contender, and this might very well be the best deck in the format actually, which might come as a surprise to a lot of people, but it is Machine Ramon. Firstly, we got the mulligan ruling, which is very nice if you are playing Machine Ramon. And then the deck's actually also, it is extremely strong. The Endlock Man gives it a really good matchup against Blue Flare, which I think is one of the top contenders, because yes, you can stun the stack, but the Endlock Man can just redirect your attacks to your machines anyway. And then it's just really hard to get rid of the Machine Ramon and the Chaos Ramon once they are on the field for a deck like Bloomlord. And basically any other deck. The only deck that has like a relatively easy time getting rid of this deck is actually Greymon, because they do use the D-Ditch Wolf mechanic, which is one of the only mechanics that actually easily gets rid of the stack. But yeah, this deck's actually, I think it's very good in BT11, and in this format it just got so many tools that like not directly supporting it, but that just really help the deck in some way, one way or another. So yeah, this deck's actually looking very solid this format. Then Armor Rush, yeah, unlucky, you want to play too many colors, which you can't, so rip Armor Rush, I guess. Then we have another deck that is that just got better in this format, because it is like a mono red deck and you're not playing any of the cards that got hit on the list. The red mechanic is actually pretty nice in outing some stuff, but it does lack some consistency, I think, and the power level is just not quite there on the level that, Machine Ramon, Greymon, Bloomlord, and even stuff like Brigade is. But I'm going to be putting this at, like, the top of tier 2, along with Galacticmon for now. Because, again, relative to other decks, it did get a boost. And I don't think the deck is bad. So yeah, the Marsmon / Phoenixmon red vaccine deck, we might see it perform. It wouldn't surprise me that much. But we'll see. Then Mastemon, just basically every DNA deck just is having a hard time right about now. Yeah, what is there to say about it? I did put Alphamon in the list though, because I think if you're playing Mastemon and you want to be still playing a deck that functions like it, you might want to be playing Alphamon, but we'll be talking about that when we get there. But yeah, Mastemon is a deck that's just kind of non-existent in this format. Then Mervamon actually got a hit because for some reason they just outright banned the Cerebrosman Werewolf mode. However, there are lists of the Mervamon deck that didn't play this at all, that really went for like a more consistent approach, playing stuff like Lady Devimon and the new Blue Meramon, and then just went hard on playing out the little guys and stuff. And I definitely think that deck is very much playable, and I don't even think it's bad. And I'm actually going to be putting it in tier at the top of tier 2 here, because it is pretty consistent, especially with Mulligan, and you do have, the Lady Devimon and the Blue Meramon effect, where you like draw just a bunch of cards to get deeper into the deck and dig for your pieces. You can play Jack Raids, and yeah, I don't really think this deck is bad at all. The retaliation mechanic with the blockers is very strong, and yeah, I definitely actually think this is kind of a nice pick for this going into this format. It might even be better than tier 2, but just to be safe, I'm going to be putting it right there. And now we have a real victim of this format, which is going to be Garurumon, because this has been hit hard. Where Garurumon got banned, Cool Boy got banned, sort of. The X antibody option got banned, which is very rough for this deck, because I definitely think Black or Greymon is very much playable without that option, but Garurumon kind of needs it to do all the strongest stuff that it wants to do. And Yeah, it feels kind of weird to be putting it here, but I definitely think this is like a tier 3 deck. I don't think it's unplayable, because yes, you can play other Wergurumon, but they're just not as strong as the security tech +1 Wergurumon, and really missing that X antibody option is rough. Missing the consistency from the cool boys is also rough. I think I'm doing it dirty. I think okay, I'm gonna be putting it in tier 2, but at the bottom of tier 2. And yeah, what else is there to say? Just out of all the decks, aside from the DNA decks, I guess, and Jesmon, this just really drew the short end of the stick. But it will be nice to be finally in a format where Melga is not such an oppressive force, which it has been since BT9. Then Blue Flare is another deck that I think will be doing very well into this format. Yeah, let's put it there. It wasn't hit at all. In fact, it only got boosted by DevX getting the hammer. We did see this deck top both the North American and the European finals, I'm pretty sure. And I guess it just kind of depends how many stack decks you're going to be facing, right? But even stack decks you can outspeed, because sometimes Blue Flare can just like go all Rookie Rush and then just close out the game super fast. But again, sometimes you will need to be digging for your pieces, you're just not seeing them. But we do have the Mulligan ruling, which is nice. Yeah, I definitely think this is one of the decks that got the biggest boost compared to the regular format from this list. And I definitely think we will be seeing this deck perform very well. And I think going into this format, you definitely want to prepare for the Blue Flare deck in some way. Then another blue deck is Mirage Galgamon. But yeah, this deck is just it's a little bit underwhelming, right? Again, relative to other decks, yes, it did get better, but I really feel like if you want to be playing a blue deck like this, you want to be playing Ulforce, which we'll be talking about in a moment. The mechanic of this deck, where you give your opponent cards, basically, just so counterproductive. Yeah, so tier 3 deck. Then we have Mother D Reaper, which actually didn't get hit at all. So I do think it's a little bit better than it is in a regular form, because I do think we will be seeing less of Black or Greymon, and I'm going to be putting it like in tier 2 as well, because it's always been kind of strong. And if you do see the right matchups, then it's actually very, very strong. Like, it does have a really good matchup into D Brigade, for example. And it can just be really fast and just go, play out the Reaper and just close out the game. And this is one of the decks that still can play the X antibody option, which is playing it already, which is kind of funny, I guess. But yeah, I definitely think this deck got boosted compared to the regular format. Then Ophanimon, which I think is the deck you probably want to be playing if you want to play Massimon, but basically can't, right? Where you're playing like a floaty purple-yellow strategy. You can still play the Hell Scythes and the Chaos Degradation even. Just your top end is a lot less high rolly, a lot weaker even. But the recovery and deletion, as well as the floating ability of Ophanimon, is very nice. And definitely do think this is like a tier 2 deck, and definitely wouldn't be surprised if this tops one of the ultimate cups in this format. Ragnar Lord Mon, I mean, yeah, this is just another DNA deck, right? And DNA decks are unplayable in this format, basically. So it just goes over there. Then we have Rustarenomon, which honestly just suffers the same thing as the Mirage Galgamon deck, I think. Just inherently, it's not strong enough, even compared to the other decks that got hit. I don't really think it's quite there yet, sadly. Then we have Crossheart, which I think is actually the best deck in the current BT11 format. However, the monocolor rule on this deck is very, very rough. I did see people trying to make lists with just like red-yellow cards, so like red base, but yeah, I don't see it. Like, I don't think this is unplayable, but I definitely think it's not good, right? You can't even play some of the Digicross options you want to be playing, because you're basically just playing Shoutmon for Digicross pieces. Like, I do think it's sort of playable. It's definitely better than DNA decks, but if this stops, then, I mean, chapeau, you're very, very good at this game. And then the last top contender, which I think is Ulforce, which honestly I think the 3 best decks in this format will be Ulforce, Bloomlord, and Machine Dramon. I honestly think Ulforce is very strong in the BT11 format. It just struggles with some matchups like Black or Greymon, which got a huge power decrease or a huge nerf in this list. And I definitely think if you're playing Ulforce, this Ultimate Cup format is gonna be your chance to shine, much like the Machine Ramon. The deck can definitely, it can high roll, it didn't really get hit at all, like you can't play Omnimon I guess, but most lists I saw were only playing 1 at most. You do have the bouncing to get rid of your opponent's field. You can just swing a lot of times. Again, just nothing got hit in this deck, and I already thought it was quite strong. With the Mulligan, it's even better, because it did sometimes suffer some consistency, but now, you know, you can just draw a new hand, basically. So yeah, Machine Ramon, Ulforce players, your time is now, and then the last deck's gonna be War Greymon, which I don't think this is bad, I do think this is a tier 2 deck. But again, it really suffers mostly from the hit on the X antibody option, which was very important in this deck. But I do think you can probably still build the deck, sort of, and do some shenanigans with it. But again, now that I think about it, actually, the Omnimon hits also very hard for that deck, because that's definitely one thing you always want to be doing with this deck. So I kind of feel like this is sort of in the same spot as Begra Army. Not a very great time to be a Wargrey X player. But yeah, that is my tier list. I did go through it as fast as possible, because I know a lot of people don't really want to be watching me talk like 1+ hours about this format. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the Ultimate Cup format, actually, because I do think it is a lot of fun. Really looking forward to the creative decks that people will be coming up with, and seeing some other decks top than what we have gotten used to by now. Yeah, if you do enjoy this type of content, gameplay stuff, tier lists, just discussion about the meta in general, deck profiles, of course, be sure to subscribe to my channel, leave a like, leave a comment about what you think about the Ultimate Cup format and the decks that you think will be performing well or not be performing well. I'd love to read it. I'll try to respond as much as possible. And yeah, if you subscribe, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!